The courtroom wasn't ready for what followed the moment she entered. No spotlight, no entourage, no dramatic entrance, just Beyonce walking in with nothing but the click of her heels echoing off the stone floor. No music, no makeup crew, no filters, just truth approaching the witness stand. She wasn't there to perform. She wasn't there to defend a brand. She was there to say something that had lived inside her for far too long. Before we continue, viewer discretion is strongly advised. This content is strictly for entertainment and educational purposes only. This is the detailed courtroom testimony for the ongoing federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs, as reported by Inner City Press. Also, comment below where you are watching from and the time you are watching the video. Thank you. For decades, Beyonce had stood as a symbol of strength, poise, and restraint. But today, something in her had shifted. Today wasn't about protecting an image, it was about protecting her peace. As she sat and adjusted the mic, her voice came low but unwavering. I stayed quiet for too long. The room fell utterly still. Journalists froze mid-sentence, jurors leaned forward, Diddy didn't blink. It was a sentence no one expected, not from her, not here, not like this. But there it was, cutting through years of silence like glass shattering in a chapel. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Beyonce wasn't there to accuse, she was there to remember, to name what had gone unnamed. She spoke about a night years ago, an after-party few knew she'd even attended. An awards celebration tucked behind velvet ropes. There she had overheard a conversation between Diddy and two executives. They weren't talking about music, they were talking about control. They were planning around people, she said, not with them. No names, no direct accusations, but her eyes never left the jury. Her tone made one thing clear. What she had witnessed stayed with her. I watched good people disappear, she said. Voices, stories, careers, one by one. She paused, not to dramatize, but because breathing through it was hard. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that staying in my own lane was the smart thing. But every time I stayed silent, I felt like I gave permission. Behind her, Diddy sat still, his jaw tightened. His attorney scribbled notes, flipping pages and looking increasingly uneasy. But Beyonce didn't break. This wasn't a performance. This was someone who had spent years carrying a weight no one else could see. She was letting it go, word by word. I've had conversations off record, she admitted. I've warned women even when I couldn't name the reason. Just a feeling, just a knowing. The prosecutor asked gently, when did you start realizing the silence wasn't just fear, but power? Beyonce didn't blink, when the same names kept vanishing, over and over. She recounted stories of artists she had once helped, a few household names, many you wouldn't know. Talented, kind, brave. But their visibility disappeared almost overnight. They didn't burn out, she said, they were erased. And when asked if those disappearances connected back to Diddy, her answer was quiet, yes. Every time I looked into it, he was in the room. The courtroom was frozen. Pens hovered above paper. Reporters looked at each other, unsure if they were allowed to exhale. She didn't speak in absolutes. She didn't offer hearsay. She offered memory. There was a rooftop party in 2018, she continued. Small group, no photos, controlled guest list. One artist, young, brilliant, was on the verge of coming forward about something. There was talk, nervous energy, and then someone said, "Don't worry, Diddy's handling it." No laughter, no pushback, just nods. That was the moment I knew, Beyonce said. The silence wasn't protection, it was permission. She adjusted her posture, not dramatically, just enough to show she was done shrinking. It took years for me to realize silence doesn't make you neutral, it makes you useful, to the wrong people. With that, the foundation had cracked. Did anyone ever try to intimidate you into staying quiet? Beyonce paused, a noticeable hesitation for the first time. Not directly, she said, but the industry has its ways, meetings that suddenly don't happen, collaborations that vanish, headlines that start framing you as difficult or cold or a diva. She let the words hang. It's not always threats, sometimes it's just silence. She turned to face the jury again. I'm not here for sympathy. I've had success. I've had a shield others didn't. But if someone like me, someone with this platform, could feel powerless, then what happens to those who have no voice at all? From the defense table, Diddy leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. His face gave nothing away, but his eyes did. Something had shifted. This wasn't his arena anymore. Beyonce went on. I used to think silence was strength, that if I focused on the art, everything else would fall into place. But that's not how it works. Truth doesn't fix itself. You have to speak it. The jury didn't move. They weren't staring at a superstar. They were listening to a woman telling a truth too long buried. And it wasn't just powerful. It was undeniable. This wasn't a headline. It wasn't about fame. This was a reckoning. And Beyonce had just shattered the illusion. The courtroom lights dimmed subtly above them, long shadows creeping across the walls. But nothing cast a longer shadow than the words Beyonce had just spoken. Even the silence afterward felt reverent, as if the room itself understood the weight of what had just been laid bare. The prosecutor gave her a moment to breathe. Then, Miss Knowles Carter, did you ever confront Mr. Combs directly? Her jaw set. Yes. That single word struck the room like thunder. Even the court stenographer paused, stunned. It was private, she said. No cameras, no press. After a benefit concert in Miami, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe I had misunderstood. She looked up, voice steady. But he didn't deny it. He just said, you know how this game works, B? What did you take that to mean? The prosecutor asked. That silence was expected. That keeping quiet was part of the agreement. She described how that moment changed her. How every public appearance, every studio session after that night felt different. The air got heavier. The invitations stopped coming. People she'd worked with for years began to pull back. They never tell you to your face, she said, but you feel it. You know when you've been marked. She paused. And once you're marked, the doors don't slam shut. They just stop opening. The prosecutor opened a folder. Miss Knowles Carter, is this a record of a shelved collaboration between you and another female artist connected to Mr. Combs's label? Beyonce nodded. She was brilliant. One of the most powerful new voices I'd heard in years. We recorded 2 tracks, but after word spread that she planned to speak out about a certain producer, the label pulled everything. Did Mr. Combs have any ties to that producer? Beyonce's tone hardened. More than ties, he funded the project. Another wave passed through the courtroom. The jury shifted. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. What happened to that artist? The prosecutor asked. She disappeared, Beyonce said softly. Not literally. She's still alive, but her career, her voice, it vanished. She was erased. A long pause followed. Her eyes welled, not from rage, but from grief. I tried reaching out. Her number was disconnected. Her team was gone. She had become invisible in a world that once couldn't get enough of her. At that, Diddy's lawyer stood up abruptly. Objection. Speculation. The judge didn't flinch. Overruled. The witness is recounting first-hand experiences. The tension ramped up. Diddy leaned into his attorney, voice low, expression sharper now. But Beyonce was steady. She leaned in just slightly, her voice clear. This isn't revenge. I'm not here because I hate anyone. I'm here because silence destroyed too many people. Every time we looked away, someone lost something. Sometimes everything. She softened, not in volume, but in feeling. I've stayed quiet too long, but I won't sit back and watch more people lose their dreams just to keep powerful men comfortable. The words cut deep. The jury didn't see a global icon in that moment. They saw a woman, a human being, carrying more than her own story. She was holding space for dozens whose stories were lost. The silence that followed wasn't for show. It was real, heavy, respectful, and most of all, believing. Diddy felt it. Everyone did. And the silence didn't wait for a gavel or a judge. It was the kind of silence that follows truth. The words had finally been spoken aloud after being buried for years. Diddy sat frozen behind his legal team, his hands clasped together, elbows on the table. His eyes locked on some distant point beyond the bench, like he was staring through time itself, trying to undo what had just happened through sheer force of will. But there was no going back. The prosecutor stepped aside, his role momentarily complete. The courtroom braced itself as Diddy's lead defense attorney rose. He was composed, polished, and confident, embodying the very system Beyonce had just spoken of. He wasn't going to challenge her with rage. He'd go for something subtler, erosion. He approached the witness stand with rehearsed calm. Miss Knowles Carter, he began, voice measured, polite. You're one of the most influential figures in global entertainment. Are we to believe someone of your magnitude could be threatened into silence? Beyonce didn't flinch. I'm not asking them to believe anything. I'm asking them to listen. The attorney smirked faintly. Let me rephrase. You've built a brand on empowerment, on speaking truth. Are you saying that you, Beyonce, were afraid? Her gaze didn't waver. I'm saying that no amount of fame can shield you from the cost of telling the wrong truth in the wrong room. The courtroom remained still. The attorney walked slowly, pacing. You've referenced conversations, behavior, energy. But where's the tangible evidence? Where's the email, the audio, the direct tie to my client? Her reply came without pause. Power doesn't always leave fingerprints. Sometimes it just leaves silence. That silence was now thick in the room. The jury leaned closer. The judge didn't interrupt. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a collision of control, of lived memory, of power wielded through omission. No documents, he pressed. No recordings? No, she said. Because the kind of power I'm talking about doesn't go on record. It moves through suggestion, through phone calls, through people who never write anything down, through fear. He stepped in. So you're asking us to decide based on your feelings? I'm asking you, she said, to look at the pattern and see what's been hiding behind the performance. The air in the room seemed heavier. The attorney shifted his tactic. Isn't it true you've had creative differences with Mr. Combs? Conflicting album dates, tour venues, competition in the market? She didn't flinch. My work has never depended on tearing someone else down. If that's how others succeed, that's on them. I didn't come here to compete. I came here to tell the truth. A flicker of hesitation passed over his face, brief but visible, because this wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't performance. This was raw conviction, unpolished and unflinching. The defense attorney returned to his seat, quieter than before. Beyonce remained still for a moment longer. The silence that followed was its own statement. Thank you, Miss Knowles-Carter, the judge said finally. She rose, stepping down with the same quiet grace she had walked in with. Not a whisper was heard. All eyes remained on her until she sat. Even the judge, no stranger to spectacle, paused before moving on. The moment required it. This wasn't a media event. It was truth, stripped of filters, echoing in a room not designed to contain it. Then, the prosecutor stood again, not with fire, but with reverence. The next witness wouldn't match the star power. He didn't need to. A man entered, late 40s, clean cut, no celebrity glow, just a man with a worn face and a locked jaw. His expression carried years of silence. He sat. He adjusted the mic. I worked for him, he began. Not just security, logistics. I made sure certain people got into the right rooms and certain people didn't. The prosecutor nodded. Were you ever instructed to block specific individuals? Yes, he answered. Mostly artists, a few reporters, occasionally someone who was asking the wrong questions. Did those orders come directly from Mr. Combs? He hesitated. Not always, but they came from his top team, and his team didn't do anything without knowing he'd want it. Did this ever involve Miss Knowles-Carter? Knowles-Carter, the witness nodded. There was a meeting scheduled. One of her collaborators was trying to get her into a session with an up-and-coming artist from Combs's circle. Next day, it was canceled. No explanation. Was that common? Very. The jury listened, absorbing every word like puzzle pieces clicking into place. Then came the moment that changed everything. The witness reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a flash drive. I held on to this, he said. I shouldn't have. But something told me this day would come. The judge reviewed the evidence. After a brief consultation with both legal teams, he allowed it. What played next wasn't loud, but it was seismic, audio. A conversation recorded privately during a retreat in Aspen. It wasn't Beyonce's voice. It was Diddy's, clear, unmistakable. He was laughing, casually, even playfully. And then she's smart, but she knows the rules. Even she's not dumb enough to cross me in public. Trust me, she'll stay in line. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to, because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't volume, it's certainty. And this was certainty. Diddy's legal team scrambled. They objected, questioned authenticity, challenged the context, but the damage was done. It wasn't just that Beyonce had told the truth. Now the jury had heard it. In Diddy's own voice, his arrogance, his assumption of control, his confidence that someone like her, someone like Beyonce, would never dare speak against him. But she had. And now so had the very system he built to protect himself. As the audio ended, Beyonce didn't move. She didn't react. She didn't need to, because everyone in that courtroom already knew. The silence she broke wasn't just hers. It belonged to all the people he had tried to quiet. The room sat breathless, frozen, like it was afraid to move too fast. But this wasn't magic. It was truth, harsh, unfiltered, and now undeniable. For years, Diddy had been protected, shielded by layers of money, lawyers, executives, handlers. But those layers were unraveling, one thread at a time. And the thread that just snapped? It was his own voice, soaked in casual dominance. The jury wasn't just hearing anymore, they were feeling it. And what they felt wasn't strength, it was fear, dressed as confidence. The judge called for a short recess, not because anyone asked, but because sometimes even justice needs a moment to breathe. As the courtroom emptied, Beyonce stayed seated. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look around. She just stared ahead, quiet but resolved. Something had changed in her eyes. It wasn't personal anymore. It was spiritual. She hadn't just testified. She'd taken a stand against an empire many thought untouchable. Across the aisle, Diddy leaned in, whispering furiously to his team. His body language said it all. He wasn't the polished mogul anymore. He looked cornered, not by Beyonce, but by a truth he thought would never stretch this far. When court resumed, there was no music, no spotlight, just the subtle shuffle of a room that knew something sacred had been opened. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor," he said, "we request to recall Ms. Knowles Carter for one final question." Murmurs fluttered. Recalls weren't routine, but the judge approved it. Beyonce stepped forward again. No need to swear her in. Her presence had already etched itself into the trial. The prosecutor didn't need to dig for details. He asked one question. Why now? Why speak after all this time? Why choose fire over silence? She took a breath, then answered, "Because I realize silence protects no one but the people who abuse it." The room froze again. "I stayed quiet because I didn't want to be the one to shake things up. I thought if I kept my head down, stayed focused, I could do more good from the inside. But I was wrong." Her voice didn't waver. "Every day I didn't speak, someone else lost their voice. And when I saw those people disappear, when I saw the headlines twist, when the lights dimmed on artists who deserved better, I knew I was part of the problem." She turned slightly, locked eyes with the jury. "So now I speak, even if it's late, even if it costs me, because there's a generation watching, and I want them to know silence isn't strength. Truth is." The judge didn't speak. He didn't have to. Everyone in that courtroom felt it. Diddy's team tried not to show it, but the storm had landed, not with noise, but with truth. Steady and relentless, like rain against a roof that never lets up. And Beyonce, she stepped down for the final time, not as an entertainer, not as a witness, but as a reminder that even the quietest voices can shatter walls when they finally choose to rise. The final blow didn't come from a scream. It didn't erupt from an argument or some dramatic outburst. It came as calm, undeniable truth, layered over time, supported by voices once too afraid to speak, and anchored by a woman who no longer accepted silence as safety. As Beyonce took her seat again, the weight in the room wasn't tension anymore. It was clarity. And clarity, once seen, cannot be unseen. Diddy sat back in his chair, visibly different. The man who used to command press lines with a raised chin and camera-ready smile, the man who once shaped rooms by walking into them, was now still. Not with power, but with collapse. His defense team, once crisp and confident, looked splintered. Notes scrambled across the table. Whispers flew like smoke in panic. But none of it mattered now. Their silence said what words could not. They had no more moves. Because the board, the courtroom, the press, the public had already flipped. Then came the final round of arguments. The judge cleared his throat, called both sides forward. This was the last time they'd speak before the jury disappeared behind closed doors. Diddy's lead attorney rose first. His voice, once theatrical and smooth, now dragged like a tired broom. He looked at the jury not like a fighter, but like a man trying to rescue a sinking ship with a paper cup. "Yes, you've heard emotional testimony," he began. "Yes, you've heard stories. He gestured toward Beyonce. She is one of the most powerful voices in the world, but power is persuasive. It can shape how we hear things. It can make something feel true, even when the facts remain cloudy. He tried to cast doubt, to reshape the narrative, but his voice lacked force. Each sentence fell softer than the one before, not because it was quiet, but because it didn't matter anymore. Then came the prosecution. They didn't speak louder. They didn't need to. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand what you've heard, the prosecutor said plainly. You just have to be human. He stepped gently across the floor, a calm in his tone that carried more weight than volume ever could. You've heard a woman who had every reason to remain silent, risk everything to speak. You've seen how silence gets used like a weapon, how power erases voices without ever raising a hand. He paused. No, she didn't come in with paperwork or spreadsheets. She came with something more dangerous to people like this defendant. Clarity, conviction, truth. He let the words settle. You heard it not just from her, but from people who once stood beside this man, people who now step forward because they could no longer carry what they knew. He turned to face the jury directly. You don't need blood to see the scars. They live in silence, and today, for the first time, you heard what was buried beneath that silence. A final pause. No dramatic ending, just truth, laid out without armor. Then silence. The jury was dismissed. They stood, file by file, and walked out, and the waiting began. Minutes passed, then hours. No one left. Not the press, not the public, not Beyonce. She sat still, hands folded, eyes steady, breathing slow. Not like a performer, like a soldier, one who'd marched through fire and now waited for the world to catch up. Diddy didn't look her way again, because he knew. This wasn't about whether the jury would side with her. This was about what the public had already seen, about what had already shifted inside every witness, every viewer, every person who once believed silence meant safety. The verdict, whenever it came, was just formality. Some verdicts hit long before they're spoken. 6 hours later, the jury returned. 6 long hours of silence that carried more thunder than any shouted argument. Outside, the crowd had swelled. Phones raised, live streams ran nonstop. Inside, not a single seat sat empty. Everyone stood. Hearts thudded like drums. Beyonce didn't flinch. She sat upright, hands calm in her lap. She didn't glance at the crowd or search the room. Her eyes stayed locked ahead. Not on Diddy, not on the judge, but on the space where justice either arrives or refuses to. Diddy, in contrast, had changed. Gone was the confidence. His fingers tapped against the table. His suit looked expensive, but he looked small, shrunk by truth, worn by time. Hunted by the possibility that the empire he once ruled had finally slipped through his fingers. The judge returned, sat, adjusted his robe. He looked toward the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? A woman stood, paper in hand, voice steady. We have, Your Honor. She stepped forward. He read it silently once, then again. He gave no expression. Then he turned to the court. In the matter of this trial, he said, regarding the defendant Sean Combs, we find the defendant liable. The room didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. It exhaled, like a storm had passed through, left damage, and now the sun was creeping in through broken windows. Diddy closed his eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. Because what could he say? The silence that once protected him had finally spoken back. And it spoke louder than his entire empire. Beyonce didn't move for a few seconds. Then, slowly, she stood. The courtroom was still. The cameras didn't flash. The reporters didn't shout. Because this wasn't a moment for chaos. It was a moment for grace. She walked toward the exit head high, not in triumph, but in peace. Because this wasn't about winning. This was about finally being free from a truth that had lived in the shadows for too long. Outside, the headlines exploded. Beyonce brings down the silence. Diddy found liable after explosive testimony. Justice for the voices that vanished. But Beyonce didn't stop to read them. She didn't speak to the cameras. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't have to. She had already said everything that needed to be said. On the stand, in her truth, with her silence shattered. The impact rippled far beyond that courtroom. Other artists began speaking up. Anonymous tips started flowing to reporters. Contracts were reviewed. Executives were replaced. The system, one that had lived so long unchecked, was finally being questioned. And it all started with one voice. One voice that refused to stay quiet. One voice that didn't tremble when the world told her to sit down and smile. Beyonce walked out of that courthouse not just as a witness, but as a warning that even in an industry built on image, truth has a sound. And once it's heard, it echoes forever. Weeks passed, but the world still hadn't moved on. The echoes of that trial, of Beyonce's testimony, of the verdict that named Sean Combs liable, none of it faded into the background like so many stories before it. It lingered. It lived. Not just in the headlines, but in studios, boardrooms, dressing rooms, and behind every red carpet smile where secrets once festered unspoken. Something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about one man's fall from grace. It was about the system that allowed it. The machine that cheered him on, defended his choices, silenced his victims, and fed off the illusion that power equals invincibility. That illusion was gone, and standing in its place was a different image. Beyonce, not as an untouchable pop icon draped in diamonds, but as a woman. A truth teller, a symbol of what happens when silence finally meets its match. She didn't launch a new album in the weeks following the trial. She didn't go on a press tour. She didn't take a victory lap. She didn't need to. What she did was show up at a small studio in Houston, quietly, privately, surrounded by young women who had been waiting for a sign that speaking out didn't always end in ruin. She sat with them, listened to them. And when they asked her, "How did you know it was time?" she simply said, "Because I couldn't carry someone else's silence anymore." Behind the scenes, doors began to open that had long been welded shut. Investigations once dismissed as gossip were reopened. Survivors who had buried their voices for years found the courage to write, to film, to speak. One testimony had done that. One voice, finally released, had lit a fire no one, not even the most powerful, could extinguish. Diddy disappeared from the public eye. His team issued cold, calculated statements. His projects stalled, endorsements dropped. But it wasn't just his brand that fell. It was the untouchable image of the old guard, that carefully manicured illusion that no matter how dark your past, as long as you smiled enough, danced enough, donated enough, you'd remain a god in the eyes of the world. That era had ended. And Beyonce? She didn't stand on a mountaintop declaring herself a hero. She didn't want the crown for being brave. She wanted one thing, that no woman, no artist, no dancer, no writer, no assistant, no intern ever had to wonder whether her truth was too dangerous to speak. The world had watched her take the stand, but what mattered more was that the world believed her. Not because she was famous, but because she was right. In the years to come, there would be documentaries, panels, articles, awards for bravery, retellings of that courtroom day like folklore. But nothing would ever replace the rawness of that moment. The look in her eyes, the calm in her voice. The silence she shattered, once and for all. And if you listen closely today, you can still hear it. That echo, that truth, that reminder, that even the most powerful systems can crumble when one woman finally says, "No more," and means it. Stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you want to stay updated on the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.